Welcome to the June 2021 VMware TAM customer webinar, vSphere 7 What's New and Why Upgrade. Thank you all for taking time out and being here with us today. This webinar is organized by the VMware TAM organization to deliver great content from subject matter experts and to make sure your organization has the knowledge to take full advantage of your VMware software. Before we get into today's content, just a few housekeeping items. Operationalize your world is the topic of our next VMware TAM customer webinar. If architecting is day one, operations is day two onwards and then some. It involves extensive planning, monitoring, troubleshooting, upgrading with many personas like level 1 and 2 ops, architecture, capacity teams, and IT management, who are all responsible for keeping the operations running well. Two companies can have identical architectures, yet their operations will not be the same. Processes will be different. People will have different preferences. And the ability to use and customize virtualized operations has been a hallmark of the product from the beginning, helping customers optimize and troubleshoot their environments according to their unique operational model and needs. So in this upcoming session, we'll have Michael Patton and Brock Peterson diving into these ideas and methodologies behind operationalize your world, providing insight into the differences between architecture and operations and how you can use virtualized operations to help. This session will take place on Thursday, July 8th. Registration information will be forthcoming and provided by your TAM when it becomes available. We hope you can make it. Should be a great session. We want you to benefit from these sessions by interacting with the speaker. So if you have any questions during today's webinar, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. And at the end of today's session, you will be prompted to fill out a survey related to the value you received from this session and any topic suggestions for future sessions. Your completion of this survey is a very valuable gift back to us, and we'd greatly appreciate it. Lastly, if you miss anything, don't worry. This webinar is being recorded and your TAM can make the recording link available to you. Be sure to check us out on the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel, where after a few months, we make all of our sessions publicly available, and that includes this session. Again, that's the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel. That brings us to today's speaker and topic. Bob Plankers is a senior technical marketing architect at VMware. Prior to joining VMware, Bob spent 23 years in enterprise IT, wearing many hats from support to developer to systems engineer to manager, and brings a ton of knowledge and experience to help solve IT problems. Bob's an author on the VMware blog and on our core product site, that's core.vmware.com, and is a regular speaker and guest on numerous VMware enablement sessions, delivering valuable content to all of us here at VMware and to customers. Today, he'll be diving into some of the key features and improvements in vSphere 7, from GA to the subsequent 6-month updates, and in doing so, why you should upgrade to vSphere 7 today. We're very happy to have him present on this topic. And with that, Bob, I'll hand it over to you.
Hey, thank you very much. And I'm glad to be here. I love talking to folks, and I actually miss getting out a little bit. I just filled out my VMUG survey for maybe some in-person stuff. So light at the end of the tunnel after all of this stuff, but I hope everyone's doing all right and is properly caffeinated this morning, or if not, well, you know, we'll be fine. You know, as stated, the question and answers are open. Please feel free to put Q&A, put Qs in there, and I will work on the A part of it there. And I'll check it periodically. So feel free to put questions and answers in whenever. And at the end, we'll just kind of wrap up if there's loose stuff out there. But yeah, again, happy to be here. I hope you're all having a good day so far. Let's start in on vSphere 7. vSphere 7 was released in April of 2020, and lots of new features in it, a lot more features in it, and a lot more things in it that I'm going to be able to talk about in an hour. I'm going to hit all the high points, though, you know, the things that you can take back to your organizations and say, hey, this is why we should upgrade, you know, and all the other stuff will be icing. You know, we've really tried to move towards a more regular cadence for releasing updates, you know, the sort of our equivalent of service packs, as it were. And that's turning out to be about 6 months. So April 2020 had the GA of vSphere 7. Update 1 was October. Yeah, that would make sense, you know, 6 months later. And then the March-April timeframe for update 2. And yeah, we can't talk about futures necessarily, but it's not hard to see where we're headed here as well. So, trying to do more of a regular cadence. The last update too, I think there were 900 plus things that were improved or added or fixed in it. I'm not going to be able to talk about all that stuff. So like I said, we'll just hit the high points. One of the high points is Kubernetes. And it was originally, vSphere 7 was originally shipped with vSphere with Kubernetes. And I do admit that we have naming is hard. Naming stuff is really difficult. And so we had gone back and forth about what to name it. Our modern applications business unit had this whole Tanzu thing. Turns out that's Kubernetes as well. That wasn't a surprise, clearly, but why don't we just name it the same thing? And so in update 1, we actually renamed it to vSphere with Tanzu. So where you see Tanzu, think Kubernetes, and it's the vSphere. It's a Kubernetes functionality inside vSphere. Tanzu as a name has got a few different meanings globally. Mostly centered around skilled work. In Japan, there's something that's got a similar spelling. I think it's with an S, Tanzu. It's a series of very finely crafted boxes that all fit together nicely, and that seems to work really well. But looking at it, why are we doing this? Well, who cares about Kubernetes? Turns out a lot of people care about Kubernetes, but and so one of the things about VMware, one of the things that I really like is it's that we're rarely the first people to have a particular technology, but we are usually the first group to have, or first organization to ship something that's easy to use, to make it. We really care about how humans use this stuff. And we took a look at how DevOps teams and admin teams communicate. And it wasn't good. Hurling support tickets at each other, flaming things flying over walls, that sort of thing. And, so can we get them to coexist better? Can we get them maybe not to communicate better? That's a people problem, and you can't solve people problems with technology, but we can make it easier for everyone to be able to do their thing. And so taking a look at DevOps, they want to deploy an app. Their development and operations. They're taking responsibility for the applications. And that's a distinct change for a lot of organizations. They want to deploy it, they want to operate it, do all the day 0, day 1, day 2 sorts of stuff, but they also want the ability to choose their own tools. Part of the whole Kubernetes movement is basically a rejection of all of the stuff that organizations have got, all of the processes and old ways of doing things that were derived from basically the space programs. And, can we do this more flexibly? Well, and vSphere admins, yeah, that's great. I come from the vSphere admin side of things, things I was worried about back in the day, availability, somehow it's my fault if the availability of the infrastructure is compromised by things running in it, so we need guardrails, we need security. How do we add security to these things? Quality of service, guardrails. And then cost control, the being able to account for things and make sure that resources and costs are kept under control. And so that's what we've built into vSphere 7. vSphere with Tanzu basically allows us to build Kubernetes right on top of the existing software-defined data center, the SDDC. And on top of it, we layer something called the supervisor cluster. So there's a couple of different cluster types here, and I'll just run through it. If you're interested in Tanzu, if you're interested in the Kubernetes functionality, we've got people that can go way deep in the weeds on this stuff. And so if you're interested in that, reach out to your TAMs and ask to just to have a presentation specifically about Tanzu. But I'll talk a little bit about the supervisor cluster. The supervisor cluster is a special kind of Kubernetes cluster. It uses ESXi as its worker node. Instead of in the open source world, this would more traditionally be a Linux box, a bare metal Linux box. And you might recall when we first announced this as Project Pacific a couple of years ago at VMworld, we talked about ESXi being so efficient that workloads are actually 8% faster running this way than on Linux. And we weren't lying. It's true. On top of the supervisor, we define something called a namespace. A namespace is a Kubernetes term, but on vSphere it maps to a resource pool or a set of resource pools. security policies, availability policy, all these structures that vSphere admins already are familiar with. And then from here, we can add, we've got APIs into the supervisor cluster, the VM service and VM operators, and cluster APIs, and the Tanzu Kubernetes grid APIs as well. Yeah, and you can deploy workloads into the supervisor cluster, or you can layer on top of it Tanzu Kubernetes clusters. So these two different types of clusters here. You might say, well, why did you guys, you're trying to do something that's easy to use, right? Why did you create two clusters? Well, the supervisor cluster is actually kind of an API into vSphere itself. It doesn't completely conform with open source Kubernetes. And one of the promises we made when we shipped this was that we would ship something that was completely open source Kubernetes conformant. And so that's the Tanzu Kubernetes cluster. It's a little bit different way of running it, but it conforms completely with the open source stuff, and it's kept up to date as well. And, we, with update releases and actually patch releases, we've been enabling customers. 1.20 is the latest. I need to update this slide here. And Kubernetes, the open source project, releases a new version 3 times a year. And they're moving fast. They actually voted recently to turn it down to 3 from 4 times a year, because even they're getting a little stressed out. But we put that in there so that customers using this stuff can automatically upgrade, can do rolling upgrades as part of just patching their vSphere environment as well. And that's the promise we make to our customers who want to use this. This is us trying to make it very easy to be able to use Kubernetes. So far, it seems to be succeeding. I really appreciate that. One of the other things that we ship as part of vSphere with Tanzu is an integrated, fully supported, highly available. We've got all kinds of adjectives for it. Enterprise ready. Yeah, I think that's all of them. Load balancer for the TKG, the control plane, and the Kubernetes services inside. It's when I say it's fully integrated and fully orchestrated, a development team that wants to use it can just use it. They can just add it to their YAML files, which the application definitions, and they don't need to understand the infrastructure. A vSphere admin can set it up fairly easily, and away they go. It's built right in. And then as far as patching, it's automatically managed as part of vSphere Lifecycle Manager. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. Lifecycle Manager is the thing that replaces Update Manager in vSphere 7, and it can take a wider look at the ecosystem. And one of the ecosystem things is the load balancer that's shipped with it. Let's talk about AI and ML. These are huge growth areas. NVIDIA has been killing it lately, and our partnership with NVIDIA has been blooming in that regard. We've got support for the newest Ampere family of GPUs, the server class ones. We've got multi-instance GPU, and the idea that we can share a GPU among workloads. And if you've used this before, you'd say, Bob, well, that's neat, but we were able to do that before. And yeah, that's true. But before, it was more of a cooperative thing. It was basically Windows 3.1, where an application had to agree to play by the rules. MIG, multi-instance GPU, is more like Windows NT. It's not cooperative, it's mandatory. And so when the operating system decides that you're done, you're done. And so this avoids noisy neighbor problems and improves security. There's actually and as part of the performance enhancements, GPU Direct, the ATS service directly in the hypervisor, where we can now have multiple GPUs working together. Turns out there's workloads that need multiple GPUs, and we can do that now. And so all of these things, they also have built-in security. We do talk about intrinsic security a lot. We usually talk about that with things like NSX, and we talk about it with Carbon Black and that, but you don't get any more intrinsic than right in vSphere itself. And so building hard paths and hard boundaries and good fences inside of the product here for GPU and AI and ML workloads is really important to us. One of the other things that shipped with vSphere 7 was Bitfusion 3.0. And Bitfusion 3.0, we are a virtualization company, right? You may have heard that. And these GPUs are problematic because they are somewhere, right? We have to tie a workload to a physical piece of hardware now, and that presents operational problems. Well, In many cases, we can now virtualize the APIs for this, virtualize the CUDA API and some of the other ones listed here, and build virtual pools out of GPUs that, the one, enable the workloads to migrate. You can still use vMotion and all that stuff. Two, we're sending these calls across the network to a pool, and so we can do some operational things there. Pooling, we can add resource limits, that sort of thing, and schedules. Maybe something that maybe you want a workload, an AI workload, to have higher priority during the day than at night, that sort of thing. And so lots of interesting stuff that can happen with Bitfusion 3. Lifecycle upgrade and patching, what we call lifecycle. I've started really adding upgrade and patching, make it clear, we're really trying to think about, can we make patching easier? Can we make upgrades easier? We'd love for you folks to come up and join us at the latest versions. Most of the development for vSphere is happening at the latest versions now. And we're not backporting features like we used to. That made things really complicated. And there was a lot of drag there. And so if we fix the upgrade process, if we make it more smooth, then, then it'll be easier to do this stuff, in theory, right? Well, trying to make theory into practice here. Adding vSphere Lifecycle Manager. Update Manager got us this far, and we thank it for its service, but we needed something better. Declarative configurations. Update Manager would make sure that the stuff that you needed was there, but didn't really care beyond that, and sometimes we want to make sure things aren't there as well, especially when it comes to security and compliance and things like that. We really want to make sure that when we define the way a host looks, we want it to look exactly like that, and Lifecycle Manager can do that now. Full stack updates. We've got all these tools available to us to manage hardware. There's the Oh My VV stuff from Dell. There's the ILO amplifier stuff from HPE. I think we've got 5 or 6 different vendors that we can work with their hardware management tools now. And we can integrate BIOS updates and driver updates, firmware, directly into the declarative configuration too. So we can say, hey, when we patch, we want to make sure that all of our ESXi hosts in a particular cluster look a particular way from the firmware all the way up. And we can do that now. OEM customization. I mean, I'm sure all of you loved going out and fishing out all of the custom ISOs and all that stuff from all the different vendors and drivers and all that stuff, but it's all up on Customer Connect, my.vmware.com. And Lifecycle Manager can add it directly from my.vmware.com. No, so all you have to do, if you've got Dell servers, all you have to do is specify the Dell tools as part of the declarative configuration, and away you go. Likewise with ISOs and things like that. Super easy. I personally really appreciate that one. And Upgrade Planner. Once you get to 7, we thought about it, the upgrade process and all of the compatibility matrices and all that stuff. Why don't we let the machines do that? Those things are miserable, trying to figure out what versions of stuff need to be running where and that. Well, the machines know this. Our infrastructure knows this. Why don't we just teach it a little bit about how to check all that stuff, so we can do a pre-check when we go to do an upgrade, and it can say, hey, Bob, you're not running the latest VROPs, and you need to be running a newer VROPs to come up to 7 update 2 or 7 update 3 or whatever we're talking about. So I guess I just accidentally talked about a future there. You didn't hear anything. What? vSAN. vSAN is great. I love vSAN. And rethinking Update Manager into Lifecycle Manager offered an opportunity. I talked earlier about the larger ecosystem. Well, a larger ecosystem includes storage as well. And so can we teach Lifecycle Manager how to be more intelligent around patching vSAN clusters, so it doesn't do things that reduce availability, doesn't do things that might compromise fault domains and things like that, and honors these availability zones. And so if you're using vSAN in stretch clusters or with fault domains, you can do this right now. We've got a question out here. Recently upgraded one of our 6.7 environments to 7, and our external PSC, which converged last year, was still there and caused some issues until I rerun the command to unregister. Is that a glitch? It might be. You should definitely that's one of those cases, you should open a support case with it. And because if it does sound like a glitch to our technical support engineering staff, they will actually escalate that to engineering. I will talk about this is a great segue into my next slide, in fact, that the PSCs, I think it looks like Brian is typing an answer as well. The PSCs now, as part of 7, PSCs are gone. They were deprecated in 6, and deprecations, when we announce a deprecation, it means that it means it's still supported, but it'll go away in the future at some point. Usually the next major release, that sort of thing. And does LCM support Cisco for firmware updates? I believe the answer is yes, but check the compatibility guide for that. I am not as in tune with all of our hardware vendors as I might have been in the past, being a customer back then. But yeah, Cisco, I believe Cisco's on the list of that. I also think we've got Fujitsu and Lenovo. I don't know. I'm not going to speculate. The compatibility guide is a good way to check that. So anyhow, PSCs. So when we announce deprecation, that means it'll go away in the future, but it's still completely supported. Part of the deal, you can converge it, as the other person had said. They had converged it manually earlier, and you could do that with 6.7. There were tools to do the convergence, basically reintegrating the external PSC with vCenter server. Or if you're doing the upgrader will do it for you. And if you've got multiple PSCs, there's one thing that you need to do afterwards, and it's in the documentation, that once you converge it, I believe this is animated. Hey, look at that. Once you converge it, you need to reestablish the replication order. It'll do a pretty good job of it, but there's a thing in the documentation saying that you basically have to go and just make sure that the two end ones, you form the ring again. What do you recommend for offline update manager download services for air gap systems to get updates moving forward? UMDS, I think UMDS is still available in vSphere 7. I might be wrong about that. Air gap systems, so Lifecycle Manager's got a few things in it that will help the idea of air gap systems. It's got the ability to build sort of a primary image of a server and then import that into an environment, and that includes updates and everything. It'll bring all the depots and all that stuff as well, and so that's helpful. And we're really looking, there's a lot of people that are very interested in air gap systems. As I do security and compliance stuff on a daily basis, and so I get it completely, the air gaps. And putting the tool in the DMZ is probably a good idea. Wrapping it in all sorts of stuff. We also have well-known IP addresses and names, fully qualified DNS entries for my.vmware.com, and where it's pulling stuff from there too. So that should help there. If it's maybe not completely air gapped, and you can get out a little bit, you can lock it down that way too. All right, PSCs. So the moral of the story with PSCs is you'll get converged when you upgrade. It works really well. So there's let me clear out some of these things. Cool. Thank you, guys. Let's see. Rebuild a vCenter when we upgraded to remediate the vSAN patch. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Those, again, if you're having break fix sorts of things, definitely engage support, and one of the things we don't really recommend, we recommend limiting how much you're messing around in the appliances, and that sometimes you need to do that. And we're really working on making it so that you don't need to do that anymore. That's, if we're talking about a little bit of futures, which happens from time to time here, we're trying to avoid that, but support should be able to get you hooked up again. All right, let's talk about availability and resiliency, which I guess we were kind of talking about anyhow. Two of the biggest advantages vSphere has, nearly every feature in vSphere is designed to mitigate risk in some way. And you know, it's pretty cool when you think about it like that. So one, flexible, I add accelerators here, flexible support for accelerators. One of the things that we did is we've been teaching DRS how to place things like GPU enabled workloads and the persistent non-volatile DIMM, persistent memory workloads and things like that. We've been teaching them how to do that so that it can place workloads when the workload starts. And this is really important because that means that HA now, if something happens to the host, HA can recover them as well and recover them according to a set of rules. And we do this through something called dynamic direct path IO. I mentioned earlier that, you know, and I'm mostly joking that, well, I'm not joking that we're a virtualization company, but, you know, poking fun at us a little bit. And all problems can be solved with virtualization, right? And we virtualized the PCI interface a little bit, virtualized how workloads find the devices themselves. There's a labeling system there and called assignable hardware. And you can add labels to the workloads and to the devices so that when they start, they can automatically find each other if they've got the right capabilities. Pretty cool. Second, in the availability area, DRS. DRS got a major rewrite in 7. The original DRS cared deeply about whether the cluster was balanced or not. And it turns out nobody cares if the cluster is balanced or not. They care if their workloads are running well, you know, which makes perfect sense when you think about it, but whatever, you know, like, and so we now compute a better VM score. DRS computes a score for each VM. And it's much more comprehensive. It's got things like cache use in it, CPU cache use. It's got ready time. It's got all of this stuff in it in IO. It also computes how expensive it is to move, computationally expensive it is to move a workload from one host to another, you know. And so if it computes a score and then it computes the VM score on other hosts, and if that workload is happier or would be happier, would work better on a different host, it'll consider moving it. And so major difference here. And that comes along with updates to vMotion. vMotion got released in 2006, which makes me feel really old at this point. And it needed a little bit of love. And so vSphere 7 got this. So you come up to vSphere 7, you automatically get these updates. And the way it used to work, vMotion installs, as part of the process, it installs something to copy memory across from the source ESXi host to the destination one. And we call that page tracing. And we install these page tracers on the way we used to do it. If you're running 6.7 and earlier, we install a page tracer on basically on each virtual CPU. And so it starts copying memory across and watching for changed memory and all that stuff. And that can really impact the performance of the VM and the performance of workloads. And so a lot of customers have people that, and I used to run into this with DBAs that would really notice when we vMotion something, and they'd ask you to stop vMotioning that. And that's an operational problem. You need to be able to patch and do outage avoidance and things. And so can we do this better? Absolutely. And as it turns out, one of the things that happened between 2006 and now is a lot of guest OSs, Windows, Linux, all that sort of stuff, stopped caring so much about all the CPUs performing the same and started really acknowledging that even on bare metal hardware, CPUs will respond at different times, and it's a lot more asynchronous than it used to be. And so this lets us take advantage of, we can take advantage of that. We can put all the page tracers on one virtual CPU. We can pick on that one virtual CPU, slow it way down, and the workload continues running mostly at full speed. I mean, if you've got a one CPU VM or whatever, then maybe not, but you know, all of the other virtual CPUs operate at full speed then. And people have said that the workloads don't even notice anymore. And that's really nice. We also changed at the end of there comes a time in this whole process when we have to basically stun the VM and copy the last bits of memory across, you know, the last bits of change memory across. And big VMs that process was taking a while. And so we've been able to cut it down on a faster network. I believe our testing was done on 40 gig networks. We can take a 24 terabyte memory VM, which is huge, and we cut it down from 2 seconds to 175 milliseconds. So you can imagine and this is across, these improvements are across everything. So, you don't need a 24 terabyte VM to see this sort of improvement. The smaller VMs see this improvement as well. Let's see, vSphere 7 claims 1 vCPU to do all the page tracing work. Is that 1 vCPU from ESXi host or VM or vCenter? It's from the VM. We install it, whatever corresponds. We install it under the layer, which the VM sees as a virtual CPU. So that's how that works. Moral of the story is a lot faster vMotions. If you've got customers or if you've got downstream, I call them customers. Even when I was a VMware customer, I called my users customers, and downstream folks, app admins, workload admins, and that don't want you to vMotion stuff. It might be time to reevaluate that. We've had some folks tell us recently that they're able to now vMotion real-time workloads. Able to vMotion real-time workloads that control warehouses and things like that, where they couldn't do that before without the warehouse automation freaking out. If a VM only has 1 vCPU, is there an impact? If it's only got 1 vCPU, it will slow down, but it's probably not the largest VM to start with, so it might go quickly. All workloads are different. That's the hard part about this is I have to generalize, but it depends on your workload, and that's sort of my other joke. If IT had a motto, it would be, it depends. Another question here, updating 7U1, U2, the format of the boot data partition changed from FAT to VMFSL and might cause systems booting from SD to become corrupted. We still recommend upgrading, but so SD cards were not designed for lots of writes. Every time you write to flash devices, you destroy them a little bit. And SD cards, especially, they were meant for cameras and things like that. And so that's why the recommendations around not using SD and USB change. We also strongly recommend changing your scratch partition and your logging information, moving that off the scratch partition, which exists on the SD card, and so that you're not writing a lot to it as well. And so we're seeing that. One of the other things too is when the migration happens, one of the things that we see is that a lot of customers actually have latent errors on their SD cards, that there are already corrupt blocks on there that they don't know about. And so this process actually exposes that. And so it looks like it's our fault. It probably, we're willing to take the blame for it because we're changing stuff around, but it's the underlying media isn't the greatest. And so that's why we're really recommending doing something different moving forward. So on the vMotion improvements, do you know if any testing was done on highly network sensitive apps like call center apps? Oh, I'll talk about that in a minute here. Yes, there has been some testing done, and we've made some other improvements to networking about that. I will get to that in a second. So all right, let's keep moving here. I've got a whole bunch of stuff. So speaking of call center apps and speaking of vMotion and all that stuff, one of the other things, fast networks, to be able to use all of the bandwidth there, you used to have to manually tune the vMotion settings to be able to use a 40 gig network or 100 gig network really effectively. And you don't have to do that anymore. Update 2, I think, this is update 2. So if you come up to the latest versions here, you'll automatically get the vMotion auto scaling, where it starts different streams. One vMotion stream can do about 15 gigabits a second. And if you've got more than that, then it'll just start more streams and it'll figure that out on its own. Security and compliance. So I mentioned earlier that we talk about intrinsic security, and the idea that we're building security right into the infrastructure, not just bolting it on after the fact. And vSphere is about as intrinsic as it gets. And we've been really working hard to try to make this stuff very usable and easy to use, easy to turn on, good defaults. if you come up to vSphere 7, we finally changed the thing where the network switches aren't in promiscuous mode and all of that sort of stuff by default. So looks like there's the SD boot issue. I'm not sure how much the Q&A gets. Other people can see the Q&A here, but the links, there are some community discussions, communities.vmware.com, about the SD boot issue out there. And so take a look at that. All right. One of the big things in vSphere 7, multi-factor authentication stops a lot of ransomware and identity-based attacks, just stops them cold. And so how can we add more MFA to the product stack? And starting with vCenter Server, with vSphere 7, we added something called Identity Federation. And to start with, it's ADFS, and it connects to ADFS. ADFS, being a virtualization company, we also like ways that we can virtualize other things. ADFS was a good starting point for us because a lot of customers have access to it, one, and two, most MFA providers will plug directly into it. They know how to plug into it, and it works really well. Biggest question, somebody's probably typing it already, when are you going to support things that aren't ADFS? Please stay tuned. It's been the biggest request. We get that request, I think, daily at this point, and the product managers took it to heart about 9 months ago or so, and so we should be stay tuned. But anyhow, the ability to plug this in so that somebody coming in, it looks just like a web login. Log in with your Google account, log in with your Twitter account, Facebook. God help us all. It redirects. You type in your username, and it redirects you either to SSO. SSO still exists, and so there's that sort of break glass capability still, or it kicks you out to ADFS, and ADFS can then talk to the MFA providers and AD itself, and then if you're all good, if you can authenticate there, it'll issue a certificate, a token back to both you and to the vCenter server in which you can use it to log in. So does vSphere 7 still have separate certificates for different processes requiring the VC to be a sub CA? You can have it be a sub certificate authority, but there's actually a reverse proxy now. So instead of having hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of certificates per cluster, you have one certificate per ESXi host and one certificate for your vCenter. And actually you need one additional one for the VMCA as well. So do we need official root CA signed cert on vCenters for MS ADFS? No, but you'll need to trust. You need to add the whatever the CA cert that you're using for your ADFS servers. vSphere is just a client to ADFS at that point. And so you just need to add that to the certificate store. And you can do that now actually right through the UI, the vSphere UI in 7. So, which is actually really nice. But so good questions. I also do certificate stuff. So used to be in technical marketing, certificate questions used to be a form of hazing, as it turned out. And I really enjoyed them. So I've just kept them. So it's kind of fun. Certificates are an easy way to make your life hard, though. So, but most of the same options are still there. And sub CA is actually seeing a renaissance again, as people discover that maybe they should just have an infrastructure CA, that's separate from their organizational CA. So anyhow, we can talk about that in a future presentation. SCVES, we added that to and SGX as well. SGX support from Intel and SCVES support to from AMD. And there's protections inside of the guest OS. There's all these different layers, and then there's the VM runtime. If you log into ESXi and type PS, the Unix process list command, you'll see all these different VMX processes running the different worlds, and they're all your VMs. Around that, we've discovered every once in a while somebody can get through the VM runtime. It's called a VM escape, and it's not good. We don't like that, and because you can get into ESXi through the guest OS, and that's uncool. So we put a sandbox, actually in vSphere 6.5, we put a sandbox around it that really curtails what people, if you do manage to get through the VM runtime, you really can't do much there. In fact, when somebody does manage a VM escape nowadays, we usually invite them to come and talk to us. We participate in all these hacking programs and bug bounty programs and that. And so we've had these folks in to talk to us about all this stuff, and they very routinely tell us that they hate the sandbox, and that just makes us smile. But all of this stuff for each VM running on ESXi. But what we discovered in what was that, January of 2018 with Spectre and Meltdown, that maybe we can't trust the CPU and memory to keep all this stuff separate anymore, and in fact, there are new updates as of Tuesday, actually, from Intel about, so if you're seeing BIOS updates for desktops and things like that, most of them are desktops and low-end single CPU server parts, E3s and that. But some new and interesting stuff there. Most of them are getting really CPU vulnerabilities. Most of them are really contrived now, really hard to exploit. It's much easier to just attack an unpatched OS or something now. But anyhow, AMD has done a bunch of great work to help secure workloads on their platforms, on the AMD EPYC platforms. They added a secure processor. It's actually just a little ARM chip inside of their other CPUs. And it enables a guest OS that supports SCVES. And I'm told, actually, AMD told me yesterday that Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8.4, which has just been released, supports SCVES natively. And so that's really cool. If you've got AMD EPYC hardware, then you can turn this on directly. And then the guest OS can request an encryption key, and your memory and your CPU registers are all encrypted. So it's encrypted in use. You don't have to turn it on. It's on a guest by guest basis. So if you've got a guest that doesn't support it, no big deal. You still get some of the protections. If there's a compromise, where one VM could potentially read data from another VM's memory space, you're going to get ciphertext because it doesn't have access to the encryption keys. In fact, the hypervisor doesn't have access to the encryption keys either. So you lose vMotion here. There's some other operational considerations, but turns out with Tanzu and Kubernetes, those operational considerations go away because Tanzu and Kubernetes don't actually use vMotion. When a host is going into maintenance mode, it terminates the old setup that's on the host that's going away and just reinstantiates it somewhere else. In fact, it does it the opposite way. It reinstantiates it first and then terminates the old version and just re-registers it with load balancers and routers and stuff like that. So pretty cool. And again, with the application definitions, you can just add it straight to the YAML files there. vSphere Trust Authority, we added that in vSphere 7, the ability to, in short here, the ability to redo the way that hosts are trusted and enforce the rules so that if a host becomes untrustworthy, well, we stop trusting it. We stop giving it access to cryptographic keys and things like that. And so what this amounts to is rerouting the way the access to the key providers works, where instead of going through vCenter server, we route it now through a separate cluster. It does require a little bit of a design change here to create a vSphere Trust Authority cluster. And you can use small hosts in that they do run ESXi, but those hosts then can verify the configurations of all of the other hosts as well. And this is important basically for a lot of isolation, separation of duties, enforcement of policies. So if one of those hosts there, the green hosts that are attached here in the diagram to the VTA host becomes untrustworthy, it will revoke the access to the cryptographic keys, and the cluster will basically kind of shun it until a human comes along and figures it out. This also lets you potentially encrypt vCenter server, which is of interest to a lot of customers. Native key provider. Speaking of key providers, we've added the ability to create for vSphere to handle managing keys on its own for vSAN encryption, VM encryption, and virtual TPMs right out of the box. As we used to say, not that we have boxes anymore. This is really nice because data sanitization is really hard on SSDs. And if you can turn on encryption from the beginning, and there's a migration path if you want to turn on, use a native key provider and then switch to a standard key provider later, you can do that, no problem. And but if you want to just be able to turn this stuff on quickly and easily, then yeah, you can do that right as part of vSphere 7 Update 2 and newer. Here, it's very flexible. Networking, some improvements to networking. NSXT distributed port groups are integrated directly into ESXi now and can be managed with vCenter server. Enhanced LACP capabilities. If you're an LACP fan, as I was, there's new faster failover and new configuration options there. And I mentioned secure defaults and new override controls. There's some additional options there, and the defaults really trying to make it secure by default. One less thing to have to check and set later. We were talking a little bit ago. There was a question about telephony, and so doing some work for telephony stuff. vMotion, yes, vMotion improvements have done wonders for telephony. We've also, anything that's using a NIC pass-through, we've also done a ton of work to reduce the interrupts, decrease latency on those connections, and really decrease latency and decrease variable latency or jitter. Telephony workloads really hate that. And so we've been working with a bunch of telcos about that. And, you know, as it turns out, this worked really improves life for VoIP deployments as well. So the Cisco call managers, I'm not even sure if it's called call manager anymore, but I used to have to support one of those setups, and yeah, having all the pass-through stuff and avoiding vMotion, all that stuff, it's likely possible that most of our customers can start vMotioning and having a better experience with this. But as with all things, test it. Storage. And NVMe over fabrics, a lot of new support for this. This is a future direction of a lot of storage vendors being able to mostly just getting SCSI out of the middle of the protocol stack. SCSI was neat, but it's super old, and it's just overhead that we don't need anymore. You know, being able to talk across a network, across very fast networks, and the support for a lot of different networks. We can go over TCP, InfiniBand, the Rocky, the RDMA over converged Ethernet, Rocky, and fiber channel. So the venerable fiber channel that's out there. So yeah, this is really cool. There's a lot of cool stuff going on here. What is also really cool from an operational perspective is Windows Server failover clustering support natively with clustered VMDKs. And so your storage has to support certain types of persistent registrations. vSAN supports it. You have to turn it on. You have to turn it on. There's a command to turn it on. It's out in the KB. And but it's supported on vSAN, iSCSI, fiber channel storage, and yeah, some other gotchas. You have to do eager zero thick, so you're going to provision everything all at once. And you can still vMotion the VMs, but you can't do storage vMotion. But you know, the ability to get rid of RDMs is glorious. Honestly, you know, RDMs are just some complexity that we maybe don't need anymore, and that would be nice. vVols. Speaking of newer technologies, we've been hearing about vVols for a long time, and storage, the world of storage is necessarily kind of slow at times. You know, our file systems, if you look at the age of like Linux file systems, for example, ext4, we're talking 20, 30 years old, you know, and there's a reason for that. It's because they have to be so stable. And so it's a very long adoption process. And so vVols, we're finally seeing pick up here, vendors supporting it more readily, and we're really trying to drive it further into our product set as well. So Site Recovery Manager can interact with it directly. vRealize Operations Manager can monitor them, which is cool. Cloud Foundation can use vVol enabled storage as you know, for its workload domains. And then vSphere with Tanzu actually has a bunch of cool stuff. They call them first-class disks, and it can use vVols and the storage policy-based management there directly inside of the environment. We've got a question: barring confidentiality concerns, there's nothing confidential in any of this stuff. Will this presentation be available to the audience? I believe the answer was yes from the organizers earlier. So we will make it available. Yeah.
Yep, the TAM will be able to make it available and go over it with you for sure.
Excellent. Well, let's keep moving. We've got a few things, better read performance and snapshot consolidation, just making some incremental improvements to this stuff, especially in VMFS 6, where, if we don't have to do work, the old joke about storage is the best IO is the one you didn't have to do. Well, we're trying that approach with snapshots in 7 as well. And so improvements there that you may or may not notice. It might, or it might just be seamless. You might not even notice it, and had I not mentioned it. So vSphere management. So I spoke earlier about DRS, and one of the things that we're trying to do is sort of disaggregate vCenter server a little bit, and make it less important to the cluster's day-to-day operation, or hour by hour or minute by minute. And one of the ways we're doing that is pushing some of these services down into the cluster itself. HA can already operate, the cluster can already do HA on its own. But pushing DRS out there is something that we're doing. And to this end, we've created something called the vSphere clustering services, VCLS, which are some small VMs that get automatically deployed by vSphere, and they're managed by vSphere directly. You shouldn't mess around with them. And this can be controversial. People love it or hate it, have questions about it. Automated systems that pick up inventory will see these things, and it's just a design consideration as you're moving forward. Will it be easier to have a separate vCenter web UI certificate that's created by the company CA so you don't get cert warnings all the time? Yes, look up hybrid mode in the certificate management, where the vCenter web, the vCenter client can have a separate certificate than whatever you're using for the VMCA and the rest of the cluster. So good question. Feedback, mentions of feedback earlier. We've got now feedback built right into the vSphere client itself, the UI client. And if you click on the little smiley emoticon emoji thing in the, I believe it's upper right of the UI, the vSphere client UI now, you can tell us, hey, something you don't like, something you'd like to see improved, that sort of thing. And if you help us help you, you use our products in different ways than we've ever imagined, and you use our products on a daily basis more than we use the products. That's just a thing about software industry, is you're actually out there using it. So if something's bugging you, let us know. Are there more services that the VCLS will manage in the future? Yes, and I will leave it at that. Has the vCenter server, vCenter vSAN upgrade removed the need to have 25%, 30% slack space for vSAN, and how is it managed? I believe so. I'm not a vSAN expert, but have your TAM reach out to the vSAN folks. And I believe the answer is yes to this. I recall hearing that. So, all right, moving on. vSphere client improvements, some little stuff all over the place. Saved client searches. So if you do the same search over and over, you can just save it and just, well, keep doing it. API Explorer, one of the big things in 7 is we really doubled down on APIs. And 6, 7 and earlier, 60% API coverage, it was not good. And 7, we've got like 99% API coverage now, and you can get to it through the API Explorer right in the Developer Center inside the client. And if you expand these, it's got examples of how to use them, and you can test them out, all kinds of stuff. There's also, this was introduced in 6.7, but I like mentioning it too while we're talking about Developer Center, the code capture stuff, formerly Project Onyx, the ability to record what you're doing inside the client and turn it into, it used to be just Power CLI, but now it's Python and Go and JavaScript as well. And so you can feed it right into whatever you're building. This is I use this all the time to try to figure out what parameters I need to set for hardening VMs and things. Guest OSs. So it turns out our infrastructure isn't an end unto itself. It's a means to run other things. Who knew? But yeah, I'm a little sarcastic, sorry. But workloads are very important to us. And so enabling better things here. Trusted platform modules, VTPMs. It's worth mentioning. So we did a few things with TPMs, especially around native key provider. Native key provider, given that you can turn it on and enable that in VTPM on all vSphere license levels. There's not a licensing requirement for that for VTPM anymore. So across the board, you can use it. You can now add VTPMs for Linux distributions as well. Turns out people were switching their VMs to Windows, adding a VTPM and switching them back. Well, we said, hey, we can fix that once we found out about it, and that goes back to feedback. If you let us know that something's bugging you or you got extra work, we can actually fix that. Question coming in here is Power CLI going to continue to be improved long term? Absolutely. It's a major thing. I know there's been some dust ups out on Twitter and the communities and that about it, and some direction, but we're actually driving a lot of that stuff farther into our product development teams. And so rather than having Power CLI kind of as its own thing off to the side, being more integral in the rest of what we're doing. So yeah, a little bit of a misunderstanding about that, but absolutely, we're going to continue with that. All right, moving on. VTPM is cool. You can run BitLocker. If you need big VMs, we used to call things monster VMs, which is just kind of funny now. The configmax.vmware.com is a little site that we put together that has all the configuration maximums. There's also new hardware versions. VMware hardware version 19 enables a whole bunch of the stuff that's new. And so being able to come up to that, you can use the upgrade process that's built right in, and it's good. Native key question coming in. Hey, Mike, native key KVM is meant for disk encryption and VM secure boot only, not for VTA, correct? Yeah, it doesn't work with VTA right now. That's on our roadmap and figuring out how that'll work. But being able to do that with VTA would actually be cool. But VTA still requires a third-party KMS setup. So, and I know you're deeply familiar with that. So, and I think I have an email that I need to respond to you. Sorry about that. Here, moving on. So yeah, come up to hardware version 19. Basically, if you're running anything earlier than about 13 right now, I would really consider coming up to something newer. 13's got a lot of performance improvements, especially around CPU vulnerabilities and new hardware and things like that. EVC, if you aren't turning on EVC, please turn on EVC. The EVC smooths out the differences between CPUs, but now does it for graphics hardware as well, for GPUs, and being able to smooth out the difference. And we've got this initial idea of baseline graphics for VMs that are using graphics capabilities, and we're probably talking mostly about desktops and whatnot. But, being able to vMotion those workloads is huge, a huge operational improvement. So wrapping up, we're getting to the end here. We've got, and the guys mentioned earlier that core.vmware.com, a lot of technical marketing stuff there. We've got a YouTube channel, and we do some live streaming out there. So go out there and subscribe. You'll get a notification when we've got something scheduled coming up. The venerable vSphere blog, we also do some blogging on core.vmware.com. And we're on Twitter. If you got questions, hit our Twitter folks up. The latency on Twitter is a little higher because it goes to our social media folks, but it does get to us. And then being in my presentation, and I'm a security guy, I always recommend the security configuration guide and subscribing to advisories. There's an email list for VMSAs, the security advisories. So you can, and nothing else goes out on that list except security advisories. I definitely recommend it. So core.vmware.com for a lot of stuff there. So with that, I'm pretty much done. If there's other questions or I did a bad job of answering a question, let me know in the Q&A here and we can see if we can sort it out. Otherwise, I turn it back to the organizers here. Chris, Brian.
Yeah, great stuff today. The clustered VMDK one is something that I forgot about. So
it's a little thing that makes a lot of people's lives a little bit better, being able to get rid of an RDM or a weird iSCSI connection or something.
Yeah, for sure. All the other stuff was great too, and thanks for the links at the end and subscribing to the VMSAs, all that stuff. Good stuff.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, for sure. I don't see any other questions here. So with that, as we mentioned at the beginning, this presentation was recorded and your TAM can make it available to you. Please join us next month when we'll be diving into the ideas and concepts of operationalize your world with vRealize operations. We look forward to seeing you for that on July 8th. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, there's a couple of questions coming in here. If we can just pause for a second.
Okay.
Trey, you mentioned security is a priority. Ports.vmware.com. Oh, man, excellent. Yeah, I have got a massive update to ports.vmware.com. I've kind of taken that over because that was one of those things that kind of fell between all the product teams, and better guidance is something that I really wanted as a customer back in the day, something that I could hand to enterprise firewall admins and all that stuff. We're backporting the guidance. So the vSphere 7 guidance is fairly complete. It doesn't have absolutely everything in it right now, and we're tracking a bunch of that stuff down. In fact, I've got a meeting tomorrow about that. And when that's done, hopefully in a couple of weeks, vSphere 7 will be nearly complete, plus or minus probably a couple of typos. I'm sorry about that. If you find them, let me know. And then we're backporting a bunch of that stuff to 6.7 and 6.5 as well. So, but our focus was on 7 just because it was the newest and easiest to approach at the time. Is there going to be a new version of vCenter Converter? Boy, I don't know, actually. I think some of that stuff got subsumed into the HCX stuff. That would be a good question for your TAM. Mike, thank you for being our customer. It says, thanks for the content. Thank you for being our customer. I really appreciate all of you on this call. vSphere 7 STIG on the horizon. That's being worked out right now. We're trying to work out the STIG right now. DISA is really backed up, and so we submit it to DISA, and then it sits. They've got a backlog, and so the vSphere 6.7 STIG just came out, which tells you something, because how long ago was 6.7 shipped? 3 years ago. And so that's not us, it's them. And we understand their position. I'm not really trying to throw them under the bus. We're actually trying to work out whether we can provide STIG readiness guidance and do so in a way that doesn't annoy them. And so we're hoping to do that. But there's compliance kits out there. The security configuration guide largely matches a lot of that guidance. There's also compliance guidance out there linked on core.vmware.com that will help. Somebody advocating third-party solutions to, instead of vCenter Converter, using various backup and replication tools. So, yep, there's a lot. The nice thing about vSphere is there's a huge ecosystem and lots of options. The downside is there's a lot of options sometimes too. So, anyhow,
Very true. Yeah. So thanks again. Just to recap, we'll have our next session on July 8th. That's going to be on vRealize operations. And again, this was recorded, and your TAM will make it available to you. Appreciate everyone joining. Thank you. Have a good rest of the day or night, wherever you are. Thanks again.